Back now to our breaking news in federal court. We have just learned former Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan has been sentenced to 90 months in prison, so roughly 7.5 years, along with a $2.5 million fine as well.
Our Charlie DeMar is live at the Dirksen Federal Building with more and reaction. Charlie, took a long time to get to this sentence with a lot of context from the judge, but now we have it.
It did. This hearing started around 1 o'clock today. Federal prosecutors were asking for a sentence of about 12.5 years and a fine of $1.5 million. That fine that Madigan will have to pay is $2.5 million, and he was sentenced to 7.5 years in jail. Now, I do want to bring in Irv Miller. Irv, the judge laid out a number of factors in deciding the sentence, that he did not take this lightly, that he factored his age, his supportive family, and he really talked about a tale of two Mikes, that he did do good for the public for so many years as a public servant, but there was also the other side where Michael Madigan might have not been directly lining his pockets, but his friends, his co-conspirators. Can you talk about all that goes into getting to that verdict where we did today?
Well, the bottom line is, in this building, the type of cases that are really frowned upon are public corruption cases. And I can't tell you how many times I've stood in this very spot with other defendants previously, and we talked about the same thing, how many years this politician got to be in the penitentiary. What I think upset this judge was no remorse. He needed to show deterrence for other people, and he was outraged by the lies that this defendant told on the witness stand. Not only comment about the lies that he brought up in court, but he said there were many others during the course of his testimony. 7.5 years, I kind of saw that's where it was going during the course of today.
Madigan, obviously, his age was a big factor in this. The judge, though, made a big point today of the lies, that he did not show any contrition, any remorse, that he did have the right to testify during his trial, which he did. He took the stand, but the judge pointed to example after example and said, I even have more examples of you lying, and I'm not even going to get into that. That seemed to weigh heavy today.
It did, and you know what I think was aggravating was when this last break, the lawyers wanted to confer with Madigan to see if he wanted to make a statement to the judge, to say something, to give the judge some ability to give him a lower sentence. I'm sorry. Well, he decided not to do that. He should have basically said nothing as opposed to what he did say, and I think the judge was just outraged of everything he heard today, except for the good things that he did in the letters. Felt sorry for his wife and talked about that, but he needed to have deterrence to punishment to send a message. And I think the message was kind of loud and clear today.
Madigan apologized for what he put the people of Illinois through, but did not take any responsibility for his own actions of what he was convicted of in this building in February.
Exactly, and frankly, I hate to say it, but there's a legal reason for that. He intends to appeal the case. And if he got up there today or when he testified and said, yes, I did it, I'm sorry, he wouldn't have an appeal. So he gambled as opposed to, do I go the appellate route or I stay hard and fast and do what I have to do? Should I apologize or should I not apologize? That was the big decision.
And Madigan was sentenced to 7.5 years. He will walk out of the building today. Can you walk me through what happens next and also what Madigan can expect in terms of the time that he's actually going to have to serve?
So he is going to walk out today, but the judge is going to tell him today a sentencing date. Excuse me, a date that'll turn himself into a penitentiary. Here's the date you have to come to the Bureau of Prisons before noon on that day. The Bureau of Prisons will send you a letter telling you which prison to report to. And if he doesn't report that day, there'll be a warrant issued for his arrest. Now, he's not going to do all 7.5 years. By statute, he only has to do 85% of that total. And frankly, he'll also be allowed before that to go to a halfway house before he's actually allowed to be totally released from the Bureau of Prisons.
And where he will serve his time, that's not clear yet.
He could ask the judge to say, to make recommendations to the Bureau of Prison for, I would say, a minimum prison or a prison camp, but the judge can't tell the Bureau of Prisons where to put him. They can only make the recommendation to the Bureau of Prisons, but the bottom line, the Bureau of Prisons have to go through a classification process. Do they think he's an escapist? Do they think he's a violent person? They'll probably put him in a prison camp, but the Bureau of Prisons get to decide where he goes.
I know earlier in the day you thought we would be at this point, at about half of the 12 and a half recommendation or ask from prosecutors. It turned out that way. It didn't start that way, from the judge. The judge came down harsh, at least in the beginning, the way that this hearing was going. Can you kind of walk me through how you perceive the judge throughout this whole hearing?
Well, when you do this as often as I've done this and seen these cases, you learn how to read the tea leaves. And as the day went on, and every ruling that the judge had to make was against the defendant, was for the government. Matter of fact, the judge even exceeded some of the recommendations that the government wanted to make on the case, particularly as the amount of the loss in the case. The government wanted to figure, the judge raised it. So we kind of knew where this was going. Coupled with the lack of remorse and the need for deterrence, it was kind of an easy guess that he was not going to go anywhere near the defense recommendation of probation and home monitoring. But then again, also with the government recommending 12.5, he wasn't going to go anywhere near that either.
Like I said, I want you to stand by for 1 second, Irv. I want to bring in our anchors right now to see if there's any questions that you have from your point of view that we can throw Irv's way.
We do, Charlie, and we'd ask you as well, just so you know, Sabrina Franza is on her way down from the courtroom, so she'll be there momentarily. But Irv, I'm curious about what might have been a turn in this trial, and that was the decision to have Mike Madigan take the stand. I know it was controversial at the time, and in the end, I'm wondering, do you think this hurt him more than it helped him? Because I know, at least in one situation, he said something that opened the door to a wiretapped conversation that had been barred. Do you think this was a huge mistake as part of the strategy here?
An absolute total mistake, and I guarantee you it was against the advice of his attorneys. There was no way a competent attorney would tell a defendant like this to take the stand and make that recommendation. And believe me, these lawyers are not only competent, but they're outstanding lawyers. So this was the decision that Mr. Madigan had to make on his own, that he wanted to take the stand and testify. And as you said, Joe, evidence came in only because he took the stand. The judge had barred that testimony ahead of time, and it dealt with these ComEd workers not doing any work, which is a major part of this case. And he opened the door for that by taking the stand, and obviously he paid the price for it.
And not only did he take the stand, but lied on the stand today, as the judge laid out example after example.
Exactly. I feel sorry for the lawyers who I think are very good lawyers, and they had to do what they thought was best for their client and giving him the advice they gave. But when it comes to taking the stand, that is totally a defendant's right under the Constitution, and no matter how hard a lawyer tries to stop it, a judge will always ask the defendant, Mr. Defendant, do you wish to testify? It's your decision, it's not your lawyer's decision. So here we are.
And when a defendant makes that huge choice to take the stand, what goes into that? I mean, what are those conversations like with your own defense team to take the stand when a defendant says, hey, I know you're telling me not to, but I'm going to anyways?
I used to tell my clients, I have to tell you something, the only time a client of mine ever goes to the penitentiary is when they take the stand. Do you want to take the stand? Usually the answer was no.
And Joe, send it back to you if there's any other questions.
Charlie, I was going to see if Sabrina is there. We'd love to get her on the mic and find out a little bit more about what happened in court if we can.
Yeah. Yes, Sabrina is right here. I want to bring her in right now. She was in that overflow room. She watched as this sentence was handed down, so I will hand it over to Sabrina.
Thank you, Charlie. Yes, so Mike Madigan, he was stone cold for the entire sentencing today, aside from when he took the stand again and spoke to the judge and asking him to have mercy, for him to be able to take care of his ailing wife. As an 83-year-old man, he said he wanted to spend the rest of his days with his family, and he apologized for putting Illinois through this in the last few months, which was notable because later the judge noted Madigan's apology and said something to the effect of that's the best that they're going to get, saying that that might not have been as much remorse as he would have hoped to hear from Madigan if he were to speak during his sentencing today. And as we know, he's now going to be headed to jail for 90 months, which is an extraordinary amount of time for a man that is 83 years old and is now presumably he could be spending the rest of his life in prison. And like I said, he was stone cold the entire time during his sentencing. His face was pretty much emotionless. He did get a little fidgety with his hands after the sentencing came down, but aside from that, he just sat and he watched what was going on from his seat, from the defense table, surrounded by 5 attorneys there that have been with him through this entire process. A months-long trial with 11 days of deliberation to follow, a verdict of, oh, and we're seeing Mike Madigan come just behind us right now. If you can take a look behind us, he's exiting the building. That's former Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan. If you forgive us, our cameras are not allowed to pan into the remainder of the lobby, but he's walking out of the lobby now. He did not take any questions from the folks that were asking him to speak on his way out. He's making his way now to the exit of the federal courthouse. And he's making his way now to the cameras that are waiting outside. So I'm not sure if we have video live feed from what's happening outside, but the former speaker is leaving the federal courthouse for now the last time of this trial. They do have that live feed is what I'm hearing. Like I said, he does not seem to be answering any questions. I can kind of see what's going on from the window here. I don't think that he will be answering any questions, but reporters outside are definitely trying. That is former Illinois House Speaker Mike Madigan, the Velvet Hammer, now sentenced to 90 months in prison.
Sabrina, thank you. If we can bring Irv and Charlie back in here. Irv, I had one more question for you. As we look at the magnitude of this whole case, there were a lot of people who can't believe the government brought him down. They just thought he was untouchable. And yet today we found out a much different story.
Well, he thought he was untouchable too, and he thought he did everything that he could do to avoid getting caught, with not using a cell phone and having, just close relationships with very close friends that stood up for him. His former chief of staff is in a federal penitentiary right now because he was so loyal to him. That's just the image that he had with that inner circle around him. But he actually made a mistake. He trusted one guy, Alderman Solis, and that's how he ended up getting put into this situation. And unfortunately for him, Alderman Solis was wearing a wire.
You touched on it, that he in some ways did think he was untouchable, not using emails, kind of doing things the old school way. But ultimately, these prosecutors laid out a hell of a case that convinced a jury to convict him on some pretty serious charges that now has led to a prison sentence of 7.5 years.
Yes, he was a major player in Illinois for several governors that have gone to the penitentiary for corruption. And you would have thought that he would have said, hey, I'm going to be the good guy, I'm going to do things right. But here we are.
Ed Burke was sentenced
if I can ask her
in
a
this
quick
building
question.
Today. Mike Madigan was sentenced. In terms of the bigger picture, obviously corruption in Illinois politics has gone on for a long time. It's been a black eye for this state. What message do you think these sentences send to politicians that might not be towing the line?
I would have said this to you 10 years ago before a couple others went to the penitentiary. Learn from the mistakes. This building is just not unusual for political people in this state or this city or this county to be standing in a courtroom in front of a judge. It gets to the point where you expect it, and that's sad to say.
And I think Marie did have a question for Irv.
Yes, Charlie, Irv, thank you both so much. I wanted to ask Irv, I remember in February when the jury convicted Madigan, there was a lot of talk about how that didn't necessarily send a message to current politicians in Illinois, because there was some talk of that sort of being old guard in that behavior down in Springfield, and it being a bit of a new day, a new culture. And yet, it did feel like, and you referenced this, Irv, that a message was sent with this sentence. What do you think that message is, and do you see it reverberating throughout the state?
Marie, I hope that's the case, but, I've said that several times, not only to my friends, but also on your air, that I thought that this would, possibly be the situation that may end it, but I'm not so sure anymore.
Irv, you had said earlier that you thought it might be 7 years, right in this range. And I'm curious from Sabrina as well, although I don't think Sabrina can hear us. When I watched the readout of what the judge was saying, it seemed like at first he was going to be a little more lenient. And then all of a sudden he sort of took this path and a turn that made it clear, to your point earlier, he was going to probably come down a lot harder than you thought originally. I was wondering what it was like to hear that unfold in real time.
Well, it was interesting. Charlie and I were sitting looking at the readout on his computer as to what the judge was going through, coming up with his final decision. He started out with mitigation, the good things, one good thing after another. And I think we looked at one another and said, oh boy, this may be a lot lower than we expect. But then he did the other side, and that is the deterrence issue, the perjury issue, the lack of remorse issue. And then I said, we're back up to what I said it was going to be at about 6, 7, or 8 years.
And the judge even said that a lack of remorse is not an aggravating factor, but it was considered in his decision. The judge even said that he talked to other judges, veteran judges in this building, and said this was going to be a hard decision, back to that tale of two mics. And he ultimately then called it an abuse of the highest power, and going back to that obstruction of justice for lying repeatedly while he took the stand in his own defense.
This judge has been consistent throughout the trial, frankly, throughout his career. He was formerly in the state's attorney's office, worked in the U.S. attorney's office, been a judge now for a few years, very well respected. And I frankly think every time he made a ruling, he justified the ruling. He just didn't say X, Y, or Z, but he gave his reasons for it. And this case will eventually go up to an appeal to the Seventh Circuit in this building, and they will decide if any errors were made by the judge or the jury. But in the meantime, when the defendant today, Mr. Madigan, goes to the penitentiary, he can't get out on bond in federal court. In order for a defendant who's been sentenced to the penitentiary to have any relief at all, the judge has to make a finding that there's a strong probability that it is likely, the statute says likely, that either the case will get reversed or he'll get a new trial on appeal. That's a tough finding to make in order to get out on bond.
You touched on it a bit earlier, that part of the reason why Michael Madigan maybe didn't come out and take responsibility and apologize is really to set the table for an appeal down the line. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, when you take an appeal to a case, you're saying, hey, listen, I wasn't proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and judges, please give me a new trial. Well, if he gets a new trial and he comes into this court today and said, Judge, I did it, that's going to be a pretty quick new trial. So he had to balance which way to go. Do I want to try for the appeal, or do I want to try for a lighter sentence? And actually, he tried to protect his rights to appeal.
Perfect. And Sabrina Franza can now hear programming, so I do want to bring her in. Sabrina was in the courtroom, in the overflow room as this verdict came down. Sabrina, and Irv, don't go too far. I want you to stay here, but I do want to hand it back over to Sabrina, because Sabrina, you were there. If you can just give some color of what that was like as that sentence came down.
Yeah. It was really interesting, Charlie, because this trial has gone on for so long. It has been months. Started in October, November, and took weeks. The deliberation was 11 days or so, and it felt like today was kind of a microcosm of the length of the trial. It was a few hours of just going through. The judge said he was going to, quote, show his homework, and I actually took some notes about some of the notable things that we felt he said. There were many letters that were sent on Madigan's behalf. He said that he dwelt upon them at length in his defense, and he talked about Madigan's character specifically. That was interesting because Madigan's defense team spent so much time talking about what a public servant he was, how he is as a father, as a grandfather, and the judge admitted, he said he is a dedicated public servant regardless of the crimes that he has been accused of and convicted of, and he called him a man of kindness, which was proven, he said, by his action. They also touched on his age, which is notable. He's 83 years old. He was 82 when this trial began. The investigation into the charges against him took years, so today was really the culmination of all of that work on the defense side, on the investigator side, the federal government, the state bringing up these charges, and in going through all of the things against him. The max guideline was 105 years, which is just incredible for somebody of that age. And he said that's something that the judge had to take into account. Having said all of that, he concluded by then adding, but he did it. So he talked about his character. He talked about his history as a family man, how he would help people that he met on the street. He would help people in Springfield. But regardless of all that, he still committed the crimes that he's been convicted of and perjured himself. The judge said he littered his testimony, quote, with obstruction of justice. He called it nauseating. To Madigan's face, he said, "You lied, sir, you lied. You took the law into your own hands," when he didn't have to. It was not required to testify in his own defense, but he did so anyway. And then Madigan, just prior to the judge talking about all of this, he spoke to the judge one more time and asked for mercy because his wife is battling cancer, and still he was sentenced to 7.5 years.
Sabrina, thank you for that. We appreciate the point of view from the courtroom.
Yeah, Charlie tomorrow as well, and Irv Miller. We're going to allow you guys to all sort of hit the reset button, and we'll get the latest from you, certainly from the courthouse at the top of the hour. We'll see you soon. Thank you all.
Again, our breaking news headline: a sentence of 7.5 years in prison and a $2.5 million fine for the man who was once the most powerful politician in Illinois, former House Speaker Michael Madigan. More coverage on our news at 5.